So the what I would like to talk with you today is how to think like a business leader. And there are three elements to it, as you will see in a minute. So my name is Oliver Behrisch, and I'm a lecturer at Birkbeck Business School, and I teach typically modules that are related to strategic management. Okay, there are some. Just as if you have any questions or any if you want to anything you want to say, then please open your mic. I'm perfectly happy with that. So if this is interactive, that would be great. Otherwise, I just keep on talking about the subject, if that's all right. Okay. And let's dive into how to think like a successful business leader. Let's start by asking questions. So what do you think makes a great business leader? So is it would you think it's intelligence, it's experience, it's the amount of hard work people put in, or is it something else? Now here's something interesting happens when you think about that. So it's the question I ask you is like intelligence or experience and things like this are related on whether somebody can learn to be a leader, or whether somebody's born as a leader. And now research suggests that IQ and technical skills are one thing, but the data we have on business leader shows that it's not always the smartest or hardworking people that become great leaders. There's often something else to it, and this is what I would like to discuss with you in the next 20 minutes or so. So let's ask the core question. So the answer lies in then three skills people usually have, and this is at the same time I choose this as the outline of this short talk. So So the answer lies in three key skills: so strategic thinking, influence, and smart decision making. So this is what it all seems to come down to. So strategic thinking means seeing the big picture, and anticipating trends and making bold decisions. So influence is all about navigating the corporate power structures, how to lead teams successfully, and how to build successful relationship within and outside the organizations. Any organization. So, and these three skills, so they separate top executives and top entrepreneurs and industry disruptors from those who get stuck somewhere in middle management or struggle to grow their business. So, and my goal for today is to give you a bit of a roadmap of how to avoid getting stuck in the middle. So, for example, if you think about some of the most successful business leaders, Jeff Bezos, for example, built Amazon by focusing on a long-term strategy. So when others at the same time in the late 90s focused more on short-term profits, Steve Jobs, for example, well, he was definitely a genius in terms of what he did. But you might remember that he was also fired at one point of his career from Apple. Because he failed to understand corporate politics and Blockbuster. So this is another example of a great failure. So they failed to anticipate the streaming services, and they were basically pushed out of the market by Netflix. So these are three examples we will visit in a minute again. But the good news is now strategic thinking, influence, and smart decision making is all something people are not born with, but this is something people learn through their career. So it all can be learned, it all can be developed, and it can be mastered. So, and today I hope to show you how this works. So by the end of this session, hopefully you understand how successful business leaders think differently, how you can apply these principles to your own career, and whether you want to run a business or become an executive or fast track your success in the corporate world. So these are hopefully skills that are relevant to you. So now let's start by looking at how great business leaders develop a strategic mindset. And let's address the first question first. The question of strategy. And here my key question is, why do some leaders see the futures while others do not do that? So have you ever, for example, wondered why some business leaders have always seemed to be ahead of the curve and others behind? So let's visit Jeff Bezos again. So how did Bezos knew that e-commerce will dominate before everyone else did? Or how did Elon Musk, for example, anticipate that the electric vehicle revolution will be just around the corner, where others somehow, big legacy car manufacturers, almost dismissed it? So the question is it luck, or is it down to strategic thinking? And strategic thinking is then the ability to see the big picture. So to anticipate changes and to make bold decisions, before others do. So and the good news is now this is a skill that can be learned. Yeah. So before because I'm naturally a lecturer at the business school, so I need to I usually like to back up my data with what I say with literature and with data here. And now I would like to introduce you the work of Carol Dweck, who addressed the question. Is there what kind of mindset people have, and she divided the mindset of people into a growth mindset and fixed mindsets. So and that it seemed to make all the difference in strategic decision making. So Carol Dweck researched this for many decades. She was a psychologist from Stanford University. And there's a topic she tried to tackle for many years. So, what did her data say? What did she find out? So, she suggested that people with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are static. So they are either good at something or not, and they can't do anything about this. And Carol Dweck found that very successful business leader, they have more flexibility to their mindset, and she called this a growth mindset. So a growth mindset means that somebody believes that they can learn, adapt, and improve about almost anything. So and also she found that when people have to adopt this mindset, they embrace failure as a learning opportunity. So not something that shows them to stop here, but is more something that signals, I did something wrong, great, let's learn about this. So let's come back to Amazon again. So when Amazon launched the Fire Phone, I'm not sure whether you are old enough to remember that, Fire Phone, it failed. But instead of giving up, so Bezos used that failure to refine Amazon's innovative process, and which later led to great things like Alexa or the Amazon Web Services, and were huge successes. So the takeaway for you is here to think like a leader. You should adopt a growth mindset. So ask yourself, after every failure, what can I learn from, this? Yeah. Now, what does it mean to then think strategically? So Henry Mintzberg, is a leading thinker in strategy. He said that strategic thinking is not just planning, but it is seeing patterns and making connections and anticipating certain trends. So again, if you visit Bezos again, in the late 1990s, so most businesses were focusing on quarterly profits, while Bezos played the long game. So he reinvested Amazon's profit into infrastructure and logistics when others would not do that. And the result was, while the competitors or Amazon's competitors focused on immediate gains, Amazon, as we all know now, built a global empire. So the practical trick here, the practical tip for you is, so you should train yourself to think strategically by always asking, what is next? What are the things that others are missing? Yeah. So the example here I have is Blockbuster from earlier. So a perfect example of poor versus great strategic thinking. So in the early 2000s, Blockbuster dominated the video rental or movie rental business. So Netflix was at that time a very small startup. And when Netflix had financial trouble, they offered themselves up for sale to Blockbuster for 50 million US dollars. So Blockbuster's executives laughed at the offer. This was quite a famous example how they in the meeting how they suppressed or tried to suppress their laugh, but couldn't really when they heard that Netflix was up for sale. So Blockbuster at the end failed to see the long-term shift in consumer behavior. So people wanted convenience, not necessarily physical stores. And Netflix, on the other hand, anticipated all this. They invested in the right technology and became a 200 billion company, while Blockbuster vanished and went bankrupt. So the takeaway is, so strategic thinkers often don't just focus on what is today, so they try to anticipate the future trends and position themselves ahead of the curve. Yeah, here you see Reed Hastings, the main man who made it all possible. So how to develop strategic thinking? So there are, in my view, there are three steps you can do. So first, look beyond the obvious. So ask, what industry trends am I not seeing? Secondly, try to think long term in long cycles. So don't just optimize for today, but consider where the market is heading in the long run. And third, try to challenge assumptions. So what do people in your industry take for granted that might not be true in, for example, 5 years from now? So great business leader don't react to change; they anticipate it. So the more you train your mind to think ahead, the better your decision making will become. So now that we talked a bit about strategic thinking, let's move to something that is just as important as strategic thinking, that is influence and leadership. So even the best strategic thinkers can fail if they don't anticipate, or if they are not able to navigate organizational power structures. So let's explore this a bit more in detail. Here. So my key question here is, why do some brilliant people fail in business? So now if you imagine two equally talented people in an organization or in a company. So one climbs up the ladder quickly, so in gaining promotion and influence, while the other, again, they're equally talented. So while the other person is somewhat stuck in the middle. So despite being as brilliant and hardworking, but why does this happen? So, and there are often the literature looked at this quite in detail and tried to compare career pathways, and they found that it has somehow to do with being or with an ability to deal with power structures within organizations. So understanding corporate power structures, influence, and leadership dynamics seems to be very, very important in this case. So Jeffrey Pfeffer is a very famous researcher in this area. So he looked for many decades at power structures. And many things we know about how people are able to navigate power structures, we know from him. So quite famous researcher as well he's interesting as well from Stanford University. Now let's look at one example here. So why influence matters. So let's take the famous example of Steve Jobs. So we all know him as a visionary behind Apple, but what many forget is that in 1985 he was fired from the company he actually founded at the age of 30. Because the reason is, we know now, is because he was not able to navigate Apple's internal politics. So Jobs was obviously brilliant, but he alienated the key executives and board members, and he focused on his ideas, but neglected the power dynamics within Apple. So, and as a result, he totally lost control over Apple, and he was fired. And years later, when he returned, he had learned that very important lesson. So, influence and leadership matters just as much as innovation does. So my takeaway point for you guys is, so being great at your job is not necessarily enough. So you also need to understand how power and influence work inside organizations. Yeah. So what exactly now is influence, as Jeffrey Pfeffer defines this? So Pfeffer suggested that power and influence, or power means the ability to shape decisions, so build alliances and navigate workplace politics. And the literature usually distinguishes three types of power, of three types of influence in organizations. So first, positional power. So that means the power comes from role, for example, being a CEO or being a manager of a department. Is expert power. So that means that influence is based on what you know and the skills you have, that you are as an expert. And social power. So that means the influence you have through social relationships within the organization. So it depends on what alliances you have with other people and the level of trust you can develop within an organization. So the most successful business leaders, they don't just rely on positional power. They also are very good at social power. So not necessarily expert power, but they are, for successful business leader, very good in building social relationships within their organization. So they build relationships, they understand office politics, and they gain support for their ideas throughout the organization. So the practical tip for you guys is, so start thinking politically. So who are the key decision makers in your workplace, and who influences them? And that will almost guarantee success. Another quite famous example that drives that point home is how Sheryl Sandberg built influence at Facebook. So so when she joined Facebook as the COO, so Mark Zuckerberg was at that time a quite young CEO with very little management experience. And Sandberg didn't force her authority onto the organization. So she tried to lead more through social interaction. So instead she started to build alliances. She tried to gain trust throughout Facebook, and positioned herself as an indispensable advisor to Zuckerberg and Facebook. So, and her leadership then transformed Facebook into a business powerhouse. So that's proving that influence isn't about forcing power upon somebody or something. So it's about strategically building it. So the takeaway point for you guys is, if you want to lead, focus on influence. So try to build relationships, try to earn trust, and position yourself as someone who is seen as listening to people. Yeah. So how to build an influence and leadership in a business? So it's first learn the power dynamics. So observe who makes decisions and how they do it. Build strong relationships within the organization. So influence comes from trust and credibility. Communicate strategically. That means frame your ideas in a way that resonates with key stakeholders, and be politically, but not manipulative. So influence isn't about playing dirty. It's about being smart. So the best leaders aren't just experts in their field. They know how to inspire, they know how to persuade, and they lead people effectively without necessarily forcing themselves upon it. So, okay, so now that we understand a bit more about power and influence, let's talk about another a critical leadership skill, and that is decision making. If I may, yeah, decision making. My last point for you guys, decision making. So even the most influential leaders can fail if they make poor decisions. So let's look at this a bit more in detail. So my leading question here is, why do smart people make bad decisions? So think about some of the worst business decision in history, and Blockbuster, our earlier example, is certainly one of them, when they rejected Netflix. But there are others. So Kodak is another famous example. They ignored digital photography and went bankrupt. Nokia was failing to adapt to smartphones and went bankrupt. So, and these companies, they were not run by fools. They were very smart people in charge there, and very experienced. So why did they fail? So, and the answer is, so even the smartest people are vulnerable to cognitive biases. So they have faulty assumptions, and they are locked into short-term thinking. So now let's explore this a bit deeper. So how do great business leaders make decisions by understanding, or how can we make better decisions by understanding biases, using mental models, and learning from past failures? Yeah. So probably the two most famous people that researched that area about cognitive biases are Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky. So Kahneman received the Nobel Prize for his idea, so very influential. So, and Kahneman and Tversky's research on cognitive biases shows that our brains aren't perfect decision-making machines. So in fact, we make often very predictable mistakes, and we make these predictable mistakes over and over again. So, and Kahneman and Tversky found that they are the responsible, why this isn't the responsibility for this lies in the biases we have. So there are three key cognitive biases that hurt decision making. That hurt decision making. There are a few more, but that are the three key ones. So there's the first, the overconfidence bias. So that is a bias. That means thinking we know more than we actually do. So, for example, Kodak believed that the film photography would never die, and this is something that is always needed. But they're obviously wrong. Overconfidence bias. Then there's the sunk cost fallacy, the second one here on my list, and that is sticking to bad decisions because we have already invested in them. So Blockbuster was not able to change because they invested so much money in physical stores without realizing that in a few years now, nobody is interested in physical stores anymore in order to watch a movie. So that is the sunk cost fallacy. And the first important bias here on my list that leads to bad decision making is the confirmation bias. So confirmation bias means only paying attention to information that supports our existing beliefs. So, for example, Nokia ignored signals that Apple's iPhone was something that was revolutionize the whole industry. So they completely ignored everything else. So the great takeaway is that great leaders recognize their biases and they actively challenge their own thinking. Right. So good. Then how to improve this? How to improve decision making? How can we overcome these three biases? And there are three. It's quite a easy recipe to do this, to avoid this mistake. So there are three powerful mental models for smarter decision making. So first, as the first principle, if you adopt the first principles thinking, so think about Elon Musk. So break problems down to their fundamental truth instead of relying on assumptions only. So, for example, Elon Musk didn't ask how much do rockets cost. How much do rocket cost? So he didn't ask this question. He started instead with asking, what are the raw materials that are needed to build a rocket? So that is actually a similar way. The result might be similar, but it's a totally different way to derive this. So, and then SpaceX was able to build rockets from the ground up. The second mental model on my mind is second order thinking. So, and I use Jeff Bezos as an example. So consider that means you need to focus on the long-term consequences of today's decision making. So Bezos focused on long-term growth when he started to grow Amazon and not on short-term profits in order to boost the share price. Like all others did at that time, the late 90s. So, and that is the long-term thinking, that second order thinking made Amazon very successful.
Even an offer to wash my hair, and I was like, don't worry about it. I'll put it on the band tomorrow. Thank you. And I can't take the.
Yeah. So the third mental model I have is pro-mortem analysis, or the analysis, the avoiding failure analysis. So instead of thinking of just planning for success, you can plan for success. You can ask, so if this decision fails now in 5 years from now, why would it fail? So, and that leads to a thinking where you roll back in time. So you start something to think from the end towards from the future towards the present. And there you can avoid a number of pitfalls. So, for example, before launching a new product, so companies like Google and Apple, they conduct usually pre-mortems to identify potential pitfalls before they actually happen. So the key takeaway for you guys is use mental models to challenge assumptions and think more clearly about decision making. So just some practical tips. I go this through this quite quickly. So the idea is pause before making decisions. So don't rely on gut instinct alone. So take time to analyze the situation. Always look at the problem from diverse perspectives. So surround yourself with people who challenge your thinking. Run small experiments to test your ideas. That's all usually proved in the literature very successful in terms of leading businesses and not failing. And ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? So start thinking from the future towards the present. So are there things that can go that can actually go wrong? And if they go wrong, how would they go wrong? So the key takeaway here is that a very successful business leader, they usually have three things working for them. So they think strategically, they are able to influence and exercise influence within organizations, and they are usually good leaders. Not necessarily because they are the CEO, but because they are able to build strong relationships within the organizations, within an organization and outside, and are able to leverage these relationships. And thirdly, successful business leaders are very strong in decision making. They simply avoid too many mistakes by often thinking out of the box and adopting mental decision-making models to help them avoid mistakes.